What was the first real indication you had that something had gone wrong?
Well, I went to the gala dinner. I had on a white satin evening dress. And after the gala dinner, knowing that we were going to post letters, I thought it a good idea to go up to the drawing room and write a few letters. And as I sat there writing, this was on Sunday night, the rule and regulations of White Star are lights out 11:30, especially on Sunday. So I was writing, and the call was lights out. And I turned to the steward and I handed him my letters, and I said, I'll pay you for the stamps tomorrow morning, but take the letters, they're ready. And I walked down quietly down the hallway until I got to my stateroom. And just before going to my stateroom, A11, there was a bump. As I turned the handle of my room, there was another bump. And as I got into my room, there was a third bump. I thought to myself, what are these bumps? Sort of little pushes, nothing very violent. And I had made a date with the gentleman to take a cup of coffee with him that night. And I called out to him at a nearby stateroom, and I said, come on, see what the bumps are. And I slipped on a coat over my white satin evening dress and went right out from my own stateroom, because my stateroom had a door leading to the promenade deck. And as I got out on the promenade deck, I saw a large grey, well, it looked to me like a building floating by. Great big grey thing. But that building kept bumping along the rail, and as it bumped, it sliced off bits of ice, and ice fell all over the deck. And I, and a great many of my foolish fellow passengers, we just picked up the ice and started to play snowballs. We thought it was fun. We asked the officers if there was any danger, and said, no, nothing at all, nothing at all. Nothing at all, just a mere nothing. We just hit an iceberg. It's nothing, nothing. I remember looking over the rail and seeing a fully lighted ship very close by. I've always said that I saw a man walking on the deck, and I did. They claim I didn't, but I'm extremely farsighted. As a matter of fact, I had defective eyesight, and I was too farsighted. Now that ship, we were told, was the California. And it was the California. With all the denials that have been made since, it was the California.
How are you so sure of that?
What's that?
How are you so sure of that?
Because it was the only other ship, and when we got on the Carpathia, we were told by Captain Rostron that the Carpathia was standing by, and the officers on the Titanic told us all, don't worry, the California will pick up everybody in case you don't come back for breakfast. Now, we were told we were only going to leave because it was rules and regulations. No danger whatsoever. We'd all be back for breakfast. And I thought it was perfectly asinine to leave a warm, comfortable ship to come back for breakfast. Oh, that was why. The English have got rules and regulations, but they're just plumb crazy. I'm sticking to this ship.
And you had no idea, even long after you hit the
No, I
iceberg,
just
that you were
thought
in
it was
real
ridiculous,
danger?
ridiculous. So I went to bed. I was in bed, and some man, I never yet identified who he was, came to my door, knocked at the door, and said, "Madam, get up. They're claiming that women and children should leave the ship. put on your life belt. Get up. So I got out of bed. I only had one woolen dress that was out. A sheath dress, a half a yard around the ankles, so tight that from my hips to my ankles I was practically, well, I would say I was in a potato sack. I couldn't walk. I had a hobble. In those days, they were called hobble skirts. And there I was, in this tight skirt, absolutely useless. And I put on a wool cap and a couple of foxes. I remember a white fox and a brown fox or something. And the thinnest fur coat I had, a broadtail, which I might as well have put a tissue paper on. I couldn't have been dressed more ridiculously. And lovely velvet slippers with diamond buckles. Now I had promised my mother never to leave my little mascot. I thought nothing of danger, and the little mascot was left on my dressing table. But I did do something that was clearly idiotic. I locked the windows of all of my staterooms. I locked every trunk. I locked the bureau drawers and the cupboards. I took all the keys, the trunk keys, and then went forward on the same deck to the drawing room, A deck, and sat down comfortably in a big easy chair. And as I sat there, Wareham, my steward, came along, and I said, "Wareham, here's my trunk keys, and my stateroom keys, all my keys. I understand we're being taken off the ship, and maybe you're going to be towed to Newfoundland, and maybe I won't come back in time. So here's my trunk keys. When you get to Newfoundland, you go to the customs and send my trunks down to New York, will you?" He said, "You go on in, kiss your trunks goodbye." I said, "You think there's danger?" "Well," he said, "I've got 5 children at home. I'm a bit worried." I believe I'd kiss my trunks goodbye. Oh, I said, "For goodness sakes, go back and get my pig. It's on the dressing table." And I handed him the key to my stateroom, and he came back with the pig. And my fellow passengers looked at me in utter disgust. I noticed a great many passengers forming a queue, taking their jewelry and their money from the safe. Well, I thought everything would be safer in the safe, so I left all my jewelry and I left all my money in the safe. And this little pig was never a money bag. It's been associated over the years on television shows and films that I had enough cupidity to save my money bank. I never saved a penny, not a nickel. And it took me 3.5 years of acute starvation to pay back my debts. So I had my little pig, and I felt safe. Now, why did I have the little pig? How did I come to have it?
You tell me.
Well, in 1911, I was going to the races in Deauville, again, to cover the races. And I drove to Deauville, down that dreadful, what they call the Hill of Death, before you get to Deauville. The young man who was driving the car took the wheel, didn't permit his chauffeur to drive the car. He'd never driven a car in his life before, and he went headlong into a tree. Everybody was killed but me. And were it not for the fact that in those days they had tires strapped to the back of the car, and I by a streak of fate, was tossed into the tire. I was a little bit of a skinny thing. I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. My life was saved. I never remembered that motor accident, although they questioned me. But the night in the lifeboat, every detail, the most gruesome and the most horrible of that accident came to me vividly. Every detail of the horror of that accident I remembered in detail in the lifeboat.
But carrying that pig, which became your mascot, how did you get from the Titanic into the lifeboat?
Well, I made up my mind I wasn't going to leave the ship. Bruce Ismay stood on B deck and kept calling out, "All women and children, come to B deck." I went up twice. It was so cold. I thought myself idiotic. I'm going back. And I went back twice to A deck and sat down until finally Bruce Ismay spied me and called out to me. He said, "All women and children." I thought had left the ship. "Come up here." And I walked up to B deck, and Bruce Ismay picked me up, well, as almost as if I was a rat terrier, and threw me down a little winding iron staircase. I fell down the iron staircase and found myself between a line of sailors on either side. And I looked down and found I'd lost one of my buckles on my shoe. I wanted that buckle. I was that much interested in the buckle and absolutely disinterested in anything pertaining to saving my life, because after all it was an unsinkable ship, you see. What could happen to me? Moreover, I had my little pig. Nothing could happen to me. So I walked along the rail, and I found a gentleman standing at the rail. Strangely enough, the very gentleman that I had told on the tender that I was frightened to take the Titanic. And he said to me, "Hello, come on, you're going to get off of this ship." I said, "Not me. How do you expect me to get off of anything with this thing I've got on? I'm a prisoner in my own skirt. I can't even walk, much less get up to that rail and then jump across the ocean into a lifeboat. Oh, no, not me. I'm not an acrobat." Well, he says, "You'll have to." And as I stood there arguing with him, and I had my little pig, mind you, under my arm, it was white, under my arm, a sailor came along. He said, "Yeah, now you can do as you want, but I'm going to save your baby." And he grabbed the pig, threw it into the lifeboat. So I turned around to Mr. Monk and I said, "That settles it. Here I go. I don't know how I'm going to go, but I've got to go. I'm going to follow that pig. I promised my mother." Well, he may have thought I was insane. Nobody knew what the pig meant to me. So he made a cradle of his hands with another gentleman. I sat on his hands, put my arms around his neck, and he threw me head foremost through space. And I fell in the bottom of the boat and kept looking and looking for my pig. I found him with his broken, poor little legs broken, and his nose gone. Well, made me feel very badly, but I kind of turned him. I found he was still playing music, so that was all right.
Can you remember how many of you there were in the lifeboat?
Yes. I've managed to find a place on the gunwale and found that I was the next to last passenger in the last lifeboat and the only lifeboat that was full. 68 passengers, about 1/3 of them nearly children. That was the only lifeboat that carried the children.
And how long before you were picked up?
Well, as we left the ship, the fall lines were knotted. They cut them with a knife. We struck the water. I think it was 10 minutes to 2 or 5 minutes to 2. The ship stood there fully lighted, absolutely lighted, music playing. We heard that in the lifeboat. We still saw the lighted ship alongside. In our lifeboat, we had 3 sets of oars, perfectly useless. The ocean was just as flat, well, as your bathtub. I never saw a lake quite that flat. Inky black night, starlit, and not a ripple in the sea. And the kind of cold, well, if you want to know what kind of cold it is, just open your Frigidaire door, take a seat inside and shut the door, and you'll know what it felt like. The kind of cold that your skin seemed to congeal. Now there I was, with nothing on practically, silk stockings, no underwear, no nothing, just about freezing to death. I sat on the gunwale, and the children were crying and whimpering. It suddenly struck me, I believe I'll play music, and then the little children maybe will be diverted and amused. And there I sat, and all night long I played them at cheat. And the poor little children were so interested in the music box that most of them stopped crying. Excepting one little fellow. He squealed like a pig. And strangely enough, years later, only a few years ago, there was a reunion of Titanic survivors in New York. Very few of us. And a great big strapping 6-footer came up to me. I believe he said he was a grandfather. Said to me, I was one of the babies in your lifeboat. And I said, well, I don't recognize you. You look so different today. He said, yes, I'm grown up now. But my mother's here. And then I remembered that that little baby had been thrown by his mother in the wastebasket, and she just walked off the ship, took a lifeboat, forgot all about the baby, and only remembered when she got on the Carpathia that she ever did have a baby. And were it not for the stewardess that heard a whimpering in the wastebasket in one of the cabins, that 6-footer would not have been there to talk to me. So that's the only time I've ever been reunited with one of the babies.
And how long was it before the Carpathia picked you up?
Well, we left the ship at 10 minutes to 2. It was 5 minutes to 8, they told me. Well, we got alongside of the Carpathia the next morning. And at that time, Bruce Ismay pulled up alongside in a lace-frilled shirt, black trousers with stripes, braids down, no overcoat, not dressed, and not in a lifeboat, as people claim, standing up in the last collapsible raft. And he came alongside a few minutes after we, the last lifeboat, pulled alongside of the Carpathia. I boarded the Carpathia around about 8 o'clock. They put us on little wooden planks with a rope around us. I think they call it boatswain's cradles or something of that kind. I'm not very up on nautical terms. I ought to be, but I'm not.
Have you ever traveled by boat since?
I only traveled by ship. I never will travel by airplane. And I've traveled time and again since. And Franklin of the White Star made me return 6 months later in the same cabin with the same setup so that I would not be frightened and I would never be conscious on an ocean steamer. But after the Titanic, on the same White Star Line, I was on the Majestic when she broke in half, and I was on the Olympic when she struck a tidal wave. As a matter of fact, a great many of the captains sort of avoided me, and I often wonder if the Titanic could have escaped me. I really believe sometimes I sunk the Titanic.